ambassador to Israel to Turkmenistan, so he's ambassador, but at the same time he was instructor in National Defense College of Israel, director of political planning division, and so forth and so forth. So he's quite eminent personality, and he has quite a lot of academic titles. So several books, articles, papers, and so forth. So he is, of course, specialized in Palestinian issues. So, Ambassador Koren, just let me tell one, I don't know if it's a joke or it was true. 10 days ago, we had Blitz Forum, and the representative of Israel, Mr. Wadi Abu Nasser, told us this story. Is it true or not? I don't know. He said that Pope John Paul II was asked, is there any solution to Palestinian-Israeli problem? And of course, he answered, there are two solutions. One is realistic, the other is miraculous. They said, but tell us first realistic one. Oh, he said, it's very easy. Jesus Christ comes down and makes peace. This is realistic one. And which is miraculous? Miraculous is that they agree upon and make peace. So right. I'd like that you tell us what is going on, and was John Paul II right or not? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I try to speak with you while I'm standing. I hope it's okay. It's a great honor to be with you here. And you can hear me? It's okay? As I know Wadi Abu Nasser, we are both from same city, from Haifa. I know him personally. Although he's an Arab Christian and I'm Israeli Jew, he's also Israeli. But as a phrase, we had a lady, Prime Minister in the 70s, named Golda Meir. And when she was asked what to do about the issue that John Paul was asked about it, she said that in Israel, if you not believe in miracles, you are not realistic. So we do believe in miracles. We hope it will work for us. Anyway, one of the miracles is that Moses, our prophet, were asked by God where you want to take your people, the Israelite, after coming out from Egypt so many thousand years ago. And he was a smart, as you know, he was a very smart prophet, but he was a stutterer. So he wanted to go to Canada. You know, Canada is a very rich country with a lot of water and everything, but since he was a stutterer, it came out Knan. And since there, we are stuck in the area of the Middle East, like you are stuck in the Balkans, and we have our neighbors, we didn't choose them, that's what we have, and we have to learn to live together with them. Part of the neighborhood, passing in the last few months, a big, I would say, a big change in the society, but in fact, to my mind, the process started many, many years ago. We don't see, because we are tied to think that Facebook are changing everything, but processes, especially in society, taking a long time. And the process within the Arab society, going back to the culture, to the education system, to the political system, and so on, many, many years back. I don't want to go back so far till the time that Prophet Muhammad established Islam in the 7th century, because the system of Islam, which is not only a religion as you know, but also a political, administration, military system, and you are very close to Vienna, the place that in the 16th century Ottoman Empire got almost to Vienna and to Budapest, so you know basically what it's all about. And the system in Islam was that for the last 1,300 years they ruled the Middle East and beyond. Within Islam, when Khalifat Rasulullah is, or Sultan, or any kind of form of ruling is in the area, it means the Sultan or the Khalifa should rule and the people should obey, basically. There's not a kind of a place that the parliament of human beings vote for a Sultan or for a Khalifa. The Khalifa is nominated in a certain way in the systems that called in Islam Shura and later on went on, and bringing a man who's supposed to represent God for the community. In other words, community should obey to the instructions of the Khalifat Rasulullah. And that's not strange to you and not new to you, but that's not the real atmosphere to advocate for free and open discussion or free of expression and so on. No, that's a different path of thinking, which basically went on no matter if the center was in Mecca, in Medina, under the Umayyad in Damascus, or the Fatimid in Cairo, or the Safavid in Tehran, and so on and so forth, and the last chain was in Istanbul. The system was the same system. The change, the big change of the Middle East started in the end of the 19th century. You know it from the Balkans. We know it from the Middle East because the reasons basically are the same reasons. We call it, if you like, the Eastern question, the Sikh man on the Bosphorus, or whatever you want to call it. The changing of self-determination in the Middle East came due to the spring of the people, 1848, or if you like, French Revolution, that tried to define for the first time the identity of the people on basis of inheritage and a nation state, which wasn't known before, and from France went on to the entire world, including to what then was the center of Islam in Istanbul and to the Middle East, and try to identify the new people in the Middle East for the first time very differently from those 1,300 years of Islam. This very important time was creating new identity in the Middle East in the end of World War I, in the end of the 19th century, basically to the end of World War I. And the identity was that the Turks decided to change the whole idea of Islamic empire, to move it to a new nation-state system, and actually destructed the notion of Muslim empire in the beginning of the 20th century. Namely, when Mustafa Kemal, later on known as Ataturk, came and decided that he will cancel the institution of Sultanate in 1918, and later on to cancel the institution of Caliphate. In other words, no Khalifat Rasulullah anymore. In fact, he destroyed the idea of Islamic empire after so many years. Now the changes that occurs out of it was in the way of the elimination for the entire people who lived in the Middle East and beyond. And that was, if I'm not belong to the Sultan anymore, I'm not under the Sultan anymore, so who am I then? If the Turks decided to be young Ottomans and later on young Turks, and they constituted a nation state called Turkey instead of a center of Muslim empire, so who I am then? I am who living in Syria, I am who living in Jordan, I am who living in Saudi Arabia, living in Egypt, living in Sudan. Who I am then? So in the way of the elimination, there are two main answers. One, if I'm not Turk, if I'm not Armenian, if I'm not Bulgarian, if I'm not, I don't know what, so probably I'm an Arab. Namely, my heritage is Arabic, my language is Arabic, and I'm an Arab. What they did take from Islam at that time was the lack of the territorial dimension, namely pan-Arabism, what we call in Arabic Qawmiyya. Namely, we are Arabs, we are truly Arabs. It doesn't matter anymore if we are Muslims or Christians, we are Arab. By that process, during the 20s of the 20s, mainly in the American University of Beirut, they shaped their identity. There was no place to bring inside some elements of pluralism or way of opening for democracy for various reasons that, if you like, I can elaborate later on. But they were thinking about kind of a changing of identity instead of being modern. No wonder that from the 20s on, leaders of Arab nationality became mostly Christians. George Antonius and some others well known in Arab nationalism. In the mid of the 30s of the 20th century, there's another shape of identities in the Middle East, because Middle East was ruled mainly by two colonial European forces, namely Britain and France, who ruled in our area from Syria and Lebanon through Palestine, Transjordan, Iraq, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Sudan, in different ways of mandate. That was a mandate in Palestine, a mandate in Lebanon, a protectorate in Egypt, a condominion in Sudan, and so on. But that was due to international figure, international umbrella that should supply the European colonial forces the time of going out from the Middle East after bringing the natives, namely we are and the Arabs, to bring nation state. That changed the ideas of the identity, because from the mid-30s, when you start to talk about the territorial dimension, another word, nation state, that might bring you to define what kind of Arab are you. Are you an Arab who living in Syria and you have your own interests that belong to the area of Haleb or Hama, or you Egyptian who living in Cairo and you are heavily lean on the Nile stream? It's very different. They are both Arab, but different Arabs. So you need to define what kind of Arab are you. In those processes, in the mid-30s on, till the end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s, that most of the countries of the Middle East got into independence, including Israel in 48. Only Sudan was a little bit late in 56, but basically most of the countries get, at that time, there were two forms of ruling in the Middle East. One was the monarchy system, Saudi Arabia, the descendants of Prophet Muhammad from Beit Hashem or others, Wahhabis in the Arab Peninsula, or monarchy in Jordan, the Sharif Hussein from Mecca, or in Morocco, that was one form, or military officers who took power under the time of colonialism, and when those countries became independent, they made it civic society. I'm describing the whole process from a long centuries to show you that the expectation in the West to see from today to tomorrow democracy in the Middle East, it's simply false. It's nothing to lean on. It's a terminology that I call myself in that sense European. We think in terminology of nation state, of a democratic process after so many years, and immediately we would expect that in Syria we'll have a democracy. It's not working that way. Simply not working. To have a democracy, it's a state of mind. It's a long process of education. You cannot say, okay, from tomorrow on I'll become a democracy. Now you need to educate for pluralism, for freedom of expression, for accepting the other, not military, not by force, not by power, and so on. And that's the whole range of thinking. You cannot do it in one. Now, I don't have any claim to the Arab. Why should they immediately becoming Democrats? I mean, if they want to be a Democrat, and that is the question, if they want to be a Democrat. I'll elaborate in that point in a minute. I think that not to me to tell them what kind of a regime they need. I mean, as an Israeli who live in a region that fully with Arab countries, I would prefer to deal with democracy. That's natural. But if that's not the situation, not to me, not to preach to them, not to educate them, not to tell them what to do, not to dictate their culture, I think that as a neighbor, I need to accept what we have in the area and try to make peace with the neighbors that we have. In that regard, we're a little bit different from you and the Americans. Even in the George Bush administration, there was a very challenging project called MEPI, trying to bring democracies to the Middle East. Total failure, definitely in the time of Obama administration. And President Mubarak told not once and not twice to President Bush, stop doing it, because you're creating troubles to me. Because in our culture, that's not the way to do it. I know our culture better than you. You don't understand our culture. That's not the way to promote governing in the Arab countries, not in Egypt. And even now, if you check carefully what's going on in the Arab world, news from today, Yemen, more than 50 people killed. Egypt, actually, who's ruling there? It's a military. Who's going to be the leading candidate to be the president of Egypt? Amr Moussa. Is Amr Moussa one of the demonstrators in Tahrir Square? I don't think so. He was a foreign minister of Mubarak and the secretary of the Arab League. He's from the establishment. He does not belong to the demonstrators in Tahrir Square. So they succeeded to get rid of Mubarak, and now what? Any program that any of you know to plan to the future of Egypt, economically, democratically, parliamentary, and so on, besides trying to work on new constitution? The case of Egypt is very different from the case of Tunisia. Tunisia, relatively, economically, was the best successor for using the European money for promoting Tunisia. But that cost a heavy price of not letting anybody talk in Tunisia. That one of the most harsh dictatorship in the Middle East. The deal was, you have your economy, you have your money, but you don't open your mouth against the dictator. The story of Gaddafi is very different from the story of Tunisia. We're talking about a tribal society, basically a coalition of two tribes in Libya, between the tribe of Gaddafi and from the 60s, Abdel Salam Jalud, if you remember, the two main tribes that sharing the revenues of the oil and taking workers from all Africa to coming and work, and especially from Darfur, work in the oil industry in Libya. The story of Yemen, which is also a tribal society, is a different story. We have a leader, Ali Abdullah Saleh, who was pretty weak, and every local sheikh of a tribe can be stronger than him, and he couldn't really enable to run this country, which is a problematic one. Bahrain is a different story. We're talking about 60% Shiite supported by Iran. Syria, it's an entirely different story. We're talking about a dictatorship going on for independence. Only in 1949, Syria have 3 coup d'etats, Zaim, Hinawi, and Shishakli, in 1 year. And immediately came to revolution after revolution, and a minority of 12% of Alawites, who are non-Muslim, whenever they try to get fatwas for the Mufti of Damascus that they are Muslim, they are not considered Muslim. Or, to be more precise, they are hated by the Muslim Sunni minority in Syria, and they're cooperating with Iran, which is a Shiite leading force in the Middle East. So the Shiite in Lebanon, the Hezbollah, and in Syria actually suppressing the majority of Sunni Muslims there. Okay, suppressing not as a phrase, suppressing the Iranians sending troops to help Assad to kill its own people, as well as Hezbollah doing it. As well as Hezbollah, and Iran sent troops to fight against Yemenite Sunnis by the Houthis on the border between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. So the whole area is not really coming closer to any place of democracy. Even in Sudan, that they only a few months ago they got the independence, the South, and there was Bashir said that I will be the first to come to Juba and to bless the people there. Look what's going on. Every day people are killed there. Not only in Ebai, the area of the oil, in Nuba Mountain, in the Blue Nile, everywhere. So what I'm trying to say, that in a way we are a little bit unique or different in that area, because our heritage somehow coming from, if you like to call it, the Judeo-Christian tradition, the openness to be solely democratic, not forgetting that being survivors and being surrounded by people who think differently, we don't have for a moment to leave our aspiration for democracy. And that creates a lot of troubles, because we are challenging every day our neighboring society, whether we like it or not, whether we have peace with some of them, no matter in what form or not. So it creates structural troubles to us. Now, I'm not saying that most of the Arabs are not good people, are not intelligent, are not, but they don't maintain a political way that's going to democracy. There are even places different from each other in terms of pluralism. For example, in Egypt in the 30s there was kind of a pluralism in politics and journalism. When the British was there, the Wafd's party, and they tried to reopen it. In Lebanon, it's relatively open because of the sects, many sects there and so on. But elsewhere, because of the mosaics of ethnic groups, sects, religious and so on, the area is built on very heterogeneous idea, and it's not going well together. For example, Egypt, after the demonstrations in the Tahrir Square, they moved to a situation that they're claiming that they are democracy. But at the same token, they kept on killing Copts. 10 million out of 80-some million citizens of Egypt are Christian, Copts. They kept on causing trouble to the Copts. Syria, needless to say, you see by yourself, they're attacking their own citizens by the tanks, by the Air Force, by the Navy. It's unbelievable. Now, in the case of Assad fighting for his life and for his minority group life, because if Assad is not there anymore, they get rid of the whole Alawite hated minorities that controlled Syria for 4 decades and more. So the story, it's a big story. Now, how we are connected to the story. Our northern frontier, or northern eastern if you like, is going all the way back from Iran, Syria and Lebanon. Iran are supporting as a policy from 79, from Iranian Revolution, that was tended to be exported to the Islamic world and then to the entire world, but failed. Even in Sudan it didn't succeed because the Sunni Shiite split. Even at the time of Turabi, it didn't work in the end to be the open gate to Africa. So they're trying to use any opportunity to be in hegemony in the Middle East, being non-Arabs and Muslims from a different kind, a minority in Islam. Unlike Turkey, who was non-Arab, but a Sunni Muslim, which is different. So the fight of the hegemony between Turkey and Iran, you can see in those days. Now, you can see what's going on in Syria, and see how Iran and Turkey blame each other about the situation in Syria. The leader of Turkey, Erdogan, declared a policy of 0 enemies in the area. By the way, that due to the fact that he was rejected in the eye of the beholder from being in the European Union. You know, because according to the European Union, if you won't be a part of it, it's not one vote for one country, but it's what the size of the population of each country. So if Turkey was accepted to the European Union, more than 80 million people, like Germany basically, Turkey would be a very strong power of Europe. And you forgive me, but the Europeans are not extremely enthusiastic about it, okay? If I would say it diplomatically. So Erdogan, or even...
Depending on which European.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah. Luxembourg is not... Slovenia, I agree.
Right.
And that's true. I'm just saying, in the eye of the beholder, Erdogan sees it as a European rejection, including threatening today about NATO and so on, and he's a member of NATO. And he decided strategically to move his policy from Europe to the Middle East using the same card that the Iranians using. Okay. You tell us later on about Iran, because you are the expert for Iran and not me. But the fighting or hegemony, by the way, it's not only on the Middle East, but Central Asia as well, and so on, between Iran and Turkey, is very interesting, but it reflects directly on the Middle East. So what happened is that Iran, by policy, involved by proxies. I'm not talking at all about the nuclear policy of Iran. I'm talking about the daily international relations that held by Iranians, using by proxies forces to provoke areas that looking sensitive to the Iranian, namely using the Hezbollah, who are Shiites from Lebanon, against us in the north, using radical Muslim or radical Sunni Muslim from Gaza, the Hamas, to tackle us from the south, by the time earning time to go on with the nuclear project and trying to jeopardize any kind of attempt to come to peace agreement in the Middle East, moving and touching and pushing the Palestinians not to get to any kind of agreement with us in order to keep the area available to their interest and not to the Palestinian interest, or definitely not to the Israeli interest. Now, due to the situation now, they're trying to be involved in what's going on in Bahrain. They're definitely trying to be involved on what's going on in Syria. Their fingers are in Egypt too, definitely in Yemen, and so on and so forth. And they actually maneuvering the area to a certain point of instability because it's convenience to the Iranian. Turkey, that in the last few months lost two main allies, which is Libya and in a way Syria, no matter if Assad will survive, his status will weaken recently, and Turkey gambled very seriously on Syria to penetrate back to the Middle East, and now it's problematic. So they shifted the policy from going with Assad to going against Assad, to host the opposition in Turkey and so on and so forth, and of course attacking us. Not attacking in a deed, but attacking declaratively every day with a new idea in order to gain more support among the Arabs going to Egypt and to Libya and so on. So, as you can see, the situation is fragile. Now, unlike other situations, we're sitting down there, looking around, and actually, we cannot do much about it. If I said before that we are not involved and not preaching to what kind of a policy should be in Egypt or in Syria, nothing we can do about the domestic processes that are going on in any Arab country, neighboring country. We need to look silently and see what will emerge out of it, as well as the Palestinians in the same situation. If we came to a negotiation system and we have a unilateral withdrawal from Gaza in 2005, and we intended to go to kind of a solution those days or this year, the Arab Spring changed the whole setup, because the Palestinians could say to themselves, or some of the Palestinians, okay, if in Egypt they could get rid of the leader, if in Libya they succeeded to present a serious changing, why not among the Palestinians? And we have a very different and clear neighbor, I don't want to say enemy. Now we can get support from Egypt, from Libya, from Syria, even from Turkey now. Why don't we go ahead and make being more stubborn instead of fulfilling the agreement that we have with the Israelis from 93, namely Oslo Accords, and go. We have a full DOP with the Palestinians agreement, how we proceed in the negotiation with them in every field, in water, in garbage, in agriculture, in whatever you like, very detailed agreement, how we're working it together to go to a situation that they could come into independence. Last year, our prime ministers that came from ideological party that believed that shouldn't be a Palestinian state, he changed his mind. He said, okay, I understand that the reality, the practical situation is make me change my mind, and I'm talking now about two-state solution. The only thing I want is we are recognized, or we are about to recognize, or first to recognize a Palestinian state, but we would like to the Palestinians recognize us as a Jewish state. And here's a problem. I started before on the notions of nation state, of self-determination, and so on, that happened in the last 200 years, emerging from France to the Middle East. But when we're coming to the eve of globalization, and if you remember, Huntington spoke about, in the end of the 20th century, of changing the definition of identity, which not necessarily would be in the future a nation state, but more so a culture or civilization. And he names China, which is a nation state but a civilization, and Islam, which is not a nation state but a civilization, as a new form, potential form for the future. If you look carefully on our location in the Middle East, we are a nation state that have a Jewish majority. Out of it, 20%, we have good, truly Israelis, like your guest that spoke about in behalf of the Pope from my hometown, who are fully Israeli citizens but non-Jews, okay, like me. And that's in the inner part of the nation state. But we are surrounded immediately by the same cultures, mostly Islamic Arab culture, that have a direct link to the Arabs within, who are truly good Israelis. But by culture, they are Arab. By identity, they are Arab. So they have a problem of identity. But we, as a Jewish majority in the state of Israel, we are a very small Jewish minority in the Middle East. And it's not a minority that living in America, that oceans separate between us. We have immediate connections to Palestine. I'm living in Jerusalem, 10 minutes from Ramallah. It's not just talking about Huntington ideas. I'm feeling it every day. And as well as I have Palestinian friends, as Israeli friends, when we're talking about definition, we have to be very careful. Now, the Arabs around us have 22 states. Now, the Palestinian aspiration is to have the 23rd state. We only want one state, that's all. Being recognized. We would like to recognize Palestinian state, and most of the polls are time after time proving that most of the Israelis supporting two-state solution. We would like to have a Palestinian state, but we also want to have a Jewish state as well. as it is, not a Jewish state in terms of halakha, but a Jewish state in terms of that derived from the Holocaust spirit, that people that have no country to run to after the Holocaust need a place on earth. And that means a Jewish state. Not that the Arab is not full citizen in the Jewish state. Not that the idea. The idea is to enable Jews have a state and not to be dependent for the next time to come into Holocaust. That is the idea. And we would only like the Palestinians to say, we recognize your right for state, recognize ours. That's all. And they refuse, time after time. Now, when Anwar Sadat decided to come, the former Egyptian leader, to come to a peace treaty with Israel, he came to Jerusalem, stood in the Knesset, in front of the people, he said, no more war, no more bloodshed. We want to have peace with you. He declared it very clearly, and he did. And immediately he got all the territories back. No problem. And more than that. And we think that the peace with Egypt is extremely important to us, not only strategically but mentally, to be part of the area. What we're trying desperately to get from Arafat is recognition in our state. No. They're also using the terminology right of return. Right of return means when they have refugees who lived in my hometown, in Haifa, and I was born in Haifa. I'm indigenous too, not only the Palestinian. They want, if they're living in Amman or in America, they want to come back to Haifa, not to the Palestinian state. And we cannot agree to that. While you preserve this idea and you're not recognizing Israeli state, that's a problem to us. It's not a matter of settlement. The settlement could be solved immediately. Not immediately, but it could be solved. As we solved it in Gaza in 2005. Sharon was the prime minister. He decided no settlements anymore in Gaza, and that's it. With all the troubles it's made to the people, we get out of it. By the way, the outcome of it was missiles all the time on Sderot, on civilians, and so on and so forth, in order to show a goodwill for the Palestinians. It's not that simple. And talking to you, and you living in the Balkans, you know, you have your own history. You know what it's all about. It's not that you sign an agreement and that's it. It's a process. It's a kind of a reconciliation with people's minds and so on. So now the Palestinians decided actually not to fulfill what's written in Oslo Accord that was signed with us, accompanied by Norwegian government and by the US, trying to go unilaterally to the UN to gain some kind of dynamic of recognition of the wall in their demand, and actually bypass the negotiations to come into agreements or into mutual recognition with us, and actually dictate to us through the UN. And it's not a big deal because the non-alignment bloc in the UN automatically can vote on anything, and it will happen. And by the way, you, one of the founders of the not you, but Tito was one of the triumvirate of Abdel Nasser and Nehru that in Bandung declared on 55, declared on the non-alignment movement. And actually they would, whatever they would like, they will get support. So we think that they're trying to use the opportunity actually to enforce us to get their conditions that they cannot get in negotiation, because in order to get their share, they also have to give up something, for example, recognition. So they're going to the UN not to enable us to negotiate, but to dictate to us how to go on with the Palestinians. Now, looking around, seeing the embarrassment, the unclear atmosphere in the Arab neighborhood, they said, okay, that's a great opportunity to go ahead when everybody is confused and go on and get our targets. So that is a very short introduction to this very complicated region. Basically, that was my time. I have to stop here and to enable you to ask questions, to attack me, to provoke me, whatever you like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So, Ambassador is ready to answer your questions. Are there any?
Yes, please.
Go on.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And how could one resist an invitation to attend?
Sorry, can you introduce yourself? Can you introduce yourself? Ci se la
I
può
will.
pensare. Yeah.
Right after I finish this, but Ambassador kindly invited us to pose questions and also attack you and provoke you, and this proved irresistible to me. My name is Eva Tomic, and I work at the Foreign Ministry of Slovenia on human rights. And I thank you very much for your presentation, a very interesting presentation. And I would also like to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. But I would argue that Huntington's thesis that the end of era as we know it is coming to an end, and we are ushering into a conflict of civilizations. I think the Arab Spring, if anything, it proved Huntington dead wrong on that. And
Write a book about it.
there are many books already.
No, you.
Yes, but the problem is the time to read all the good books. I don't need to add to what's out there. And the good fact, I think, that we are experiencing in the Arab world is the strive for universal human rights. And I believe that is where we need to build future foundations, extend universal human rights to the Arab world as well. And now I would provoke you, if I may, by implying that Israel has a stake in that as well, and that the way Israel is implementing human rights very much impacts on, well, first of all, on Palestinians, but also wider in the region. You talked about a Jewish state, and it is true that Europe in 19th witnessed the establishment of nation states. But that was 200 years ago, and what we now have in Europe is a very delicate balance of minority protection systems in various countries. And we also have agreement done in 75 in Helsinki not to change those borders. So there has been an evolution through these past 200 years. And I think, you know, there is a historic delay in establishing nation states nowadays, as opposed to it being a 19th century idea. And there is a 20% of Arabs living in Israel. And right now, I think it would be hard to argue that they are completely equal to the Jewish Israelis. But more importantly, it seems to me that the current, if I may say so, brouhaha over the UN, which I think is much more hyped than the actual consequences will come out of it. But if anything that it symbolizes, it seems to me, is the burial of the two-state solution, I'm afraid, and a declaration of utter defeat of the peace process from the last 2 decades. And my question to you would be, how would you comment on that? Do you still see realistic prospects for the two-state solution? And the second of more imminent importance question that I would have for you is, what potential for eruption of violence do you see in the region following the UN developments? And what measures can Israel take to restrain violence from flaring up? I'm not saying Israel will contribute to violence, but undoubtedly to me, Israel is much interested in Abbas Fayyad link to persist and the ongoing security cooperation, etc., to continue. So how can you positively influence the situation not to flare up?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the short question. Okay, I'm joking. I think yourself, you gave some of the answers due to the question, but I'll elaborate in a few points that you touched on. In Saturday, near my home in Jerusalem, there was a demonstration in Kalandia area that the Palestinians that would like to were very enthusiastic to be prepared to the coming week to the UN, and Abbas said begged not to go to violence, and it was fine till the point that somebody lost control and started to throw stones. Luckily, we restrained the Israeli, trying not to enable emergence of violence, and we succeeded to stop it. That basically answers the question that you brought. Our interest is not to develop terrorism and violence and so on. Now, regarding to Israelis who are Arabs, in the population, by the way, I think usually the complaint in the war about their discrimination against, but in fact, their rate in the population, they are in the academia, in the hospital, doctors and so on, it's a rate on even above the population. And if you're checking carefully their situation from 48 to now, especially in the fields of education, technology and economy, they jump from 48 to 9, the highest in the world. The rate of their education and their status there's a lot to be done now, so there's no wonder why none of them, if tomorrow there will be a Palestinian state, none of them would like to move to this state, but would like to stay Israeli, and they want the right of return to go into Israel and not outside of Israel. That is very clear. In other words, if the human rights is so bad, I wonder why they would like to stay Israelis so bluntly. It's clear. Now, about our contribution to the region, I said myself, we have a character or a nature to declare everywhere that we are part of every move, we are reflecting of everything. That's not the case here. We need to be patient, looking like you and others to the development in the area. And if I said before that not to me to say to any country what kind of a regime they need, definitely I need to sit down and look around and see what's going on. I'm not saying that we are not supposed to find, our role is to try to find partners among our neighbors all the time, no matter who they are. if the Sudanese government would come tomorrow, Bashir, this criminal who's supposed to go to Hague, said, okay, tomorrow I come and make peace with Israel, we'll accept it. And we know he's a criminal, because that's the neighbor that we have. And we take it as a reality and not trying to deal now with the issue of human rights. We can tell him, look, if you deal with your people in that way, how can you come to peace? But if he decides to go and to stop doing what he's doing in Darfur, that's okay with me. What I'm saying is, unlike you, I have no any intention to go and shape, how did you call it, the idea of open democracy, you said it, among public, how did you call it, among the Arabs, to promote, you gave it a kind of a name. Is this
to promote universal
human rights.
Yeah.
I mean, we will glad if that will be the situation. That will, even if it will take 2 decades, that Tunisia will be a democracy and Egypt will be, that will be great. Because if there will be democracies in the Middle East, any attempt to sign an agreement with any country, you can be sure that it will be implemented no matter what government will be there. That's fantastic. But I'm realistic. I understand it's not going that way. And I have to accept reality as it is. So we look at, you can do it. We can't. You need to understand the differences. Because once we say to Egypt, you have to be democracy, they will come to us and say, you don't preach to us. And I understand, I accept it. I understand. You can tell them. I cannot. I'm their neighbor, I'm their partner. It's not to me to tell them I have to accept them. That, I know that in Jewish tradition there's a phrase called tikkun olam. That means that we need to lead any liberation movement in the world and anything that's changing the world. But in that case, we need to be very careful, and we need to preserve our fragile relationship with our neighbors. So in human rights, we can do the best we can to preserve our behavior towards the Palestinians, but not to tell them how to be. I strongly believe in that, and I think that if they're really moving to a democracy, with your help, with American help, that's great. That you understand it will take a long time. It's not from today to tomorrow. We can use the opportunity of openness and globalization and Facebook and so on, but I cannot expect that Egypt will be democracy tomorrow, or Syria. It's not easy. It would take time. But on the other hand, I would like to have them as peaceful neighbors, that's clear, not as enemies. So I do anything I can to be their neighbor, and to be part of projects that promoting mutual things that for their own sake, agriculture, economy, not human rights. That we have to be very careful with those issues. And once you state something, immediately people are expecting from you, and that's impossible in our situation right now. So what I suggest to ourselves is now to wait and see, to see how the puzzle of the Middle East is, and in fact and beyond, is now built now. The status of Iran, Turkey, Syria towards us and towards Central Asia, it's extremely interesting. I'm not a prophet. I don't know where it's going to lead to. I don't know what is a mutual relationship now between most of the Arabs and Turkey. It's not, as it looked like, a very nice harmony. It's not. The situation between Iran and the Arabs, he knows better than me, it's also not a full harmony, to say the least. And they're struggling their own hegemony on the Middle East, among themselves and the Arabs, among themselves and economy, and so on, and we are not fully partner at that. We need to look how they're shaping their policy. Turkey is extremely angry about us recently. You probably pay attention that we're keeping silence. We're not answering. I don't think it's contributing to the discourse. We understand it's a matter of geostrategy, and we need to be patient. And what we can contribute, if I tell you the description of the region geostrategically was to try to describe you the complexity that usually people or government tend to blame us, all the Palestinians, of not having peace or peace process. It's not only that. It's what's going on in the region that reflects on the Palestinians and on us too, in addition to the fact that each one bringing its own history. We are bringing our history, mostly from Europe, the Palestinians bringing their own history, and it's a matter of time. It's a process of reconciliation. It started already, by the way, with all this hanky-panky in the UN. It's not that we're talking with Abbas, our deputy foreign minister met today, Salam Fayyad in the contributors countries, and they spoke. It's not that we are not talking with each other. The process it's not enough. It's not now. Hopefully we are optimistic because we have nothing else to go. The fact that my mother was born close to you in Europe doesn't enable me the potential idea to come back to Europe. As a visitor, yes, not as a citizen. I would like to stay in my own state. I'm sorry for the long answer. Yeah.
Izvolite.
My name is Artur Košek, and I'm a student from the Faculty of Social Sciences. I study international relations. And I'm particularly interested in human rights, and I'm going to go study human rights in the next term. So my question is, how would you comment the Goldstone report, which analyzes the incursion of Israel into Gaza, where more than 1,000 civilian lives of Palestinians were lost, and on the Israeli side, only 20 or 40 Israeli soldiers died. So we see the discrepancy between the force of Israel and the poor Palestinian civilians, and also the schools were targeted, the Red Cross buildings were targeted, and the report found out many war crimes on the part of Israel, accusing the Israeli state of these crimes. And of course, Israel just waved their hands and said, "Oh, it's a stupid report. We're not going to even look at it." Then I'd like to ask you, how do you comment the settlements on the West Bank? You said that Israel wants to have peace in the region, but they don't respect international law. They don't respect the Security Council resolutions, which clearly say which are the boundaries of the Palestinian state. You say that you support the two-state solution, but clearly in your practice and in your actions you don't. How do you comment that? Thank you.
That's nice that you're a student for human rights, but as far as I remember, you cannot count human rights by numbers, how many people killed here and there. You better look at the process of what's going on. You know that the Hamas in Gaza, who claim for human rights, 6th article of its covenant calling for destruction of the state of Israel.
Why?
Because they believe that according to the Islamic idea of Muslim empire, Jews have no right to have a state. Very clear. Covenant written 89. You can read it, it's in English. Why? Second, when people claiming about violating human rights, shooting missiles into buses of children by intention, snipers shouting into houses from Gaza and waiting for a response from Israel in order to have casualties and coming and cry to the world, they're violating the human rights.
Why are they targeting Israel? You have to answer.
Why? Because when we established our state in 48, and 5 Arab countries simultaneously attack us in 48, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan, and Egypt, and unfortunately they didn't succeed to destroy us, but they lost territory. So in the 50s, from Gaza, not from 67, in the 50s, they have terrorist attack and they kill Jews. Why? They didn't want a Jewish state. That's why. They don't want to recognize the Jewish state because they said we don't belong to the area. That's why. It's nothing to do with occupation. The occupation that came in 67, in June 67, you know what happened in August 67? There was an Arab summit in Khartoum. You probably remember. The summit called the Three No's. The Arabs said no recognition, no peace, no negotiation with Israel. Did you know that as a student for international relations? Yeah, so before you start to count casualties, now Goldstone himself regretted afterwards about his, because he didn't want to interview Israelis who were hurt from that. Now, the system of being victimized.
I'm sorry, he did want to interview, but unfortunately, and I'm so sorry for this type of debate, but he very much wanted to interview.
Yeah, they didn't want to cooperate because we know what will be the bottom line of his report, that he came in order to show that we having crimes and not the Palestinians. Now, before, what's so funny? When an organization, 60% of the Palestinians from Gaza, shooting missiles on children, what about the human rights? Where are you?
You're doing the same thing. You're bombing Gaza.
We didn't say we don't recognize the Palestinian rights. We said we would like to have a two-state solution. The Palestinians said they don't want to recognize us.
That's not true.
That's not true. Why don't you read the Koren and the Hamas? As a student, at least read the text before you try coming and blaming. Go and study a little bit. I know you're still young. Go and study. I can give it to you either in Arabic or in English or even in Slovenian if you want. And you see what's written about the fate of the Jews, that they are supposed to be destroyed. And this area, it's endowment of Allah, Waqf Allah, Palestine, not belong to the Jews. And therefore, they fight against us, not because of the human rights. That's the bullshit they selling to you, and you buy it, because they trust you that the dynamic in the world to buy this issue of human rights. Now, I didn't say that we are perfect, we don't making any mistake. I didn't say that. We're making mistakes. That's true. But basically, the spirit of the issue of not recognizing the state.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. You simply, I advise you to go and read the Covenant and see how they provoke every day. In 2000, you said about settlement. In 2005, Sharon was the prime minister. No settlement in Gaza anymore. What did you got? They came to synagogues, they destroy they celebrate there, and they're shooting missiles on children and women. That's a reality. What about the human right? We left settlement, we went towards a situation of reconciliation, and what did we get? Missiles? Iranian every day sending ships with ammunition to attack us from Gaza? Do you think that I have an intention to prevent from Gaza to get? No. They taking ships in order to shoot. Every day they have a better missile. They're coming into Tel Aviv almost. Did you think why?
It's a vicious cycle. Because if you answer violence with violence, as Stepan Issa, the French diplomat, says, it leads to nowhere. I know that. I understand. But nobody's asking the question, why are the Hamas bombing Israel?
Okay. Let's say, I'll take your advice, I stop the circle of violence. All right. They're shooting missiles, they're killing my children, my women in Sderot and elsewhere, and I'm for human rights. I'm sitting like that, not doing anything. What about that?
Look,
Would you as a responsible government, would you do that to your people, to your citizens? It sounds normal to you?
I would talk. I wouldn't bomb, I would talk.
Sorry, well, I would interrupt this discussion, which is already a little bit too hot and interesting.
That's our reality.
Yes, and there are some other questions. So we have just 15 minutes more left. So izvolite.
Thank you very much, Mr. Koren. My name is Jure Rifal. I come from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Slovenia. And here with because we have a little bit, if I say so, parted from the topic of your main topic. And here I would like to pose you a question. With these changes in the countries around you, and it's like, let's say that maybe in Syria dictatorship is replaced by a more pluralistic society, in Egypt and so on, but that one has to think that this could also bring the so-called Arab street into the decision making. So definitely there will be some populism, and that could, part of that populism could be also related to the to Israel, to the unresolved issues that Israel has with Palestine and some Arab countries. How do you see that, how the situation may develop, and how it could influence the position of Israel in the region?
Okay. As regard to Egypt, for example, unlike many spectators, I'm not sure that the Muslim Brotherhood immediately will take power, because people are afraid, like happened in Algeria, you probably remember, a few decades ago, that the Islamists came to power and the West prevent them from controlling, or what happened in Gaza when Hamas took control by a democratic way. What will happen then? I think that a country of 80 million people, and I happen to serve in Egypt, and I know the people there. The people are people everywhere. They are not full of hatred. They have nothing to do with us. On the other hand, most of them don't full of enthusiasm from the Muslim Brotherhood for their own domestic issues. So it's true that they are the most organized institutions in Egypt, and they have the potential to take power, and so on. They might have the case that happened in Iran in '79, but not necessarily. I think that according to what we see now, the military, without any other alternative at the moment, keep on ruling till the elections, and actually knowing the disaster of the economy of Egypt and the necessity for subsidy and food every day from the entire world, a responsible leader, no matter who he will be, should see the interest of Egypt. The interest of Egypt. After Tahrir Square, they said immediately they would consider to stop or to cancel the Camp David Accord with Israel. They didn't. They said they will open the road to Gaza, to the Palestinian brothers. They didn't. By the way, they blockade Gaza on the other side of Israel. And because they understood the danger is coming for Gaza to Egypt, not only to us. Syria, I'm hopeful that if a new government will come there, they will be open for more democracy. Now, the issue that Arab leaders used to do many years to put the blame on us about everything to their own domestic necessities, I'm not sure it will work in Syria, for example, or in Libya. He tried to send them to the Golan Heights in the Nakba day, but they didn't buy this issue, although he paid them money for that, and if he would like to go, Assad, to a war tomorrow with Israel, with whom he will go to a war? With the people who suppress so brutally? Now, we all hope for a change. I think the determination of our lady from the Foreign Ministry before about collective human rights, it's an idea that we can think of, and I think in the end the interest of every country will play, and the interest of Syria as far as I know, is not to come to a war with us. So it's not necessarily pessimistic from our point of view. Wherever you have a crisis, you have a chance. I don't immediately say that everything, although what happened in Egypt last week in our embassy, they apologized. The government understands that if yesterday it happened to the Israeli embassy, tomorrow it might happen to the Slovenian embassy. No country in the world would like to show a notion that it's not controlling the security of the embassies in there. They immediately apologize and trying to, that not that all the Egyptian, now I'm reading in the papers that an Egyptian millionaire gave money to demonstrate and to come and attack the embassy. So I think that strategically Egypt, you know what, even Saudi Arabia have some common interest with Israel. So I don't necessarily see that everything is going to the wrong path.
Is there any more question? If not, just can you shortly explain me how do you comment that immediately after Mubarak was toppled, Fatah and Hamas began to cooperate. They even signed, I think, an agreement after this. So it influenced already this Arab Spring, influenced directly on Palestinians. You didn't mention it. Can you just shortly please comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't have much time, so I'll refer to it. Don't worry, I won't run away. I just remind you that if the Palestinians will accepted as members of the UN family, there will be member number 1, 2, 4. After Southern Sudan, 1, 2, 3. Okay? 1, 2, 4, just to remind you, is a UN resolution that dealing with the Palestinian refugees, and that is one of the intentions to be the 194 country. And this is saying that the Palestinian refugees should come back, what we called before the right of return. Now, they made the agreement with Hamas, which was clear that wouldn't last long because they disagree about so many things, in order to be ready to come together to the UN as a one Palestinian representative coming and promoting the area. But if you read carefully the reactions of the Hamas to this step, they're actually rejecting the idea of Abbas coming to the UN.
Thank you. Well, Ambassador, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And hvala vam da ste, thank you to everybody that you've been so here. And of course I'm inviting you everybody outside. Vse skupaj vas pa vabim na en kozarček, kjer bomo lahko še kakšno rekli.
Doctor, hey, give. Thank you very much.
Just one look, please.
Not bad.
Here. Here, please.
Okay. Thank you.
Doctor, can I ask you just for one portrait, please? Because I'm not so satisfied with the first one.
Okay.
If we
So
can.
what
Here,
you want me
just
to...
one portrait. She's still just a second.
Mi se bomo jutri videli ob 10. To je pa magister Zepel, ja, on je, ja. Tako da mi se jutri ob 10.
Jaz sem ga glih hotel.
Prav,
If we want to talk about Iran, we need many
You can talk.
Hamas and Hezbollah to make
You can talk each other. Yeah, okay.